Great. Well, good evening, and thank you all so much for joining us for Reflections of the Ella Flemings School. The Ella E Flemings School is a historic gem located in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. Originally a one-room school built in 1859, the Ella Flemings School is representative of the educational needs of a bygone era. However, this school continued to serve the children of Tewksbury until it was closed relatively recently, back in 2004. So tonight we're joined by Bill Pavao as he discusses the history of the school, including some of the people who were important in educating children in North Tewksbury for almost 150 years. So Bill, who's a former Tewksbury resident, was educated in the Tewksbury Public School System through grade 9. Although he never actually attended the Ella Flemings School, he has been interested in the history of the school since he was a little boy. Bill has channeled that interest into an upcoming book about the history of the school and the role it played within the North Tewksbury community. Bill has been a social studies teacher in the Quincy Public School System since 1998. He holds a BS in history from Fitchburg State University, and a Master's of Education from Eastern Nazarene College. Again, want to thank the Friends of the Library and the Historical Society for sponsoring. So all those watching live on Zoom and on Facebook, and those that are going to watch later on demand on YouTube, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Bill Pavao for joining us here tonight. And Bill, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Well, Robert, first of all, I thank you. Thanks for that introduction. Seriously, that's probably the best introduction I've ever had. So thank you. So first, I need to thank you for having me. And I absolutely have to thank Nancy Reed for everything that she's done for me. I mean, she has been amazingly supportive, and she's actually become a really good friend, as has Doug Sears has been great to me over the years. I mean, because I've been working on this project for many years. So I'm excited to do this talk for you, and I'm looking forward to it. I have been looking forward to it. You mentioned something that I thought was really cool, and that is that I never went to the Flemings School. I actually went to the Doing School from kindergarten to grade 6. And, you know, this was in the 1970s. And so the Flemings School was still operating, and there were 3 6th grade classes over there. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria of the Doing School, and the kids from the Flemings School would come over in the rain and the snow and the wind and the sun, and they would use the cafeteria at the Doing School, the library, the art room, the gymnasium. So they basically used the facilities of the Doing School. And I remember as a kid going, oh my God, I want to go over there so badly. I thought they were like special kids, you know, that they got to do that. And I wanted to be one of them. And when I was in 4th grade, I had Miss Wheaton as a teacher. She later married John Ryan. So Sandra Ryan was my 4th grade teacher, and she was amazing. And she had a unit that she did on Tewksbury history. And I remember there was a woman who worked for the library named Maureen Kelly. And Maureen Kelly and Miss Wheaton, who's now Mrs. Ryan, took us around Tewksbury on a tour. And I just remember falling in love with local history. And the day that they went into the Flemings School, I was absent. So I got cheated in 4th grade. But so as a kid, I used to drive, you know, when you take the bus, I don't know how they do it now, but we used to drive out of the exit, which was the exit was the closest to the Flemings School in the Doing School parking lot. And when we would drive out, I would look over to that school, and I always thought that was just the coolest place. And I wanted to be a student there so badly. And then in 5th grade, you know, I was all excited. All right, 6th grade, I'm going to get over there. I know it. And that year of 5th grade was when Prop 2.5 passed in Massachusetts, which closed the old Shawshene School, the Foster School closed, and the Flemings School. And so again, got cheated. But every Saturday morning almost, my mother would drive me up to the library, which was in the old building, not the current library. And I would read the town history books, and I was just fascinated. And my mother used to bring me up to the Flemings School, and she would lift me up, prop me up so I could look in the windows. I just wanted to be there. It was the weirdest thing, actually. I was just a different type of kid. I guess, somebody that was meant to be a history teacher, for sure. But when the school closed, there were 3 teachers over there, and one of those teachers was Monica Ware, and she moved from the Fleming School to the Dewing School. And I ended up having her as my 6th grade teacher, which was a blessing. She actually became my absolute favorite teacher. Her picture sits on my desk in my study right now. She really showed me that a teacher can, really care for their students, and which she did for me during that year. But she also helped me get to know the Flemings School. And Jack Ware was the principal then, and he had been the principal and a teacher at the Flemings School. In fact, he was a teaching principal for a while. And he brought me in to the school the first time, and it was closed due to Prop 2.5. But I got to go through the school, and I remember walking out of there and turning and shaking his hand. And that was probably the first time in my life I ever shook someone's hand, and I was like in 6th grade. So there's a lot of memories for me attached to that building. And a prize of Tewksbury is the school. But one of the gems that I want to make sure that I mention, because I'll forever be grateful to her, is Beverly Bennett, who lived right next door to the school. And she loved Tewksbury history. She loved the school. And she was absolutely amazing to me. When she passed away a few years ago, Tewksbury really lost a huge part of their history, because they say that when an older person dies, a library burns. And I really see that with Bev, that she had quite the library for sure of Tewksbury history. All right, so now that we've done all that, so we'll hit some slides here. So again, I did live in Tewksbury. We lived in the Wamisit area, and I lived in Tewksbury until I was 14 years old, from the age of 4 until I was 14. At the age of 4, I was in kindergarten, and I went home from school, and I told my mother the very first day after school that I wanted to be a teacher. And so I always knew that I was going to be a teacher. And so maybe that was like a connection to the Fleming School, that I knew that I wanted to be a teacher. I also went to the junior high school and to Tewksbury Memorial High for a few months, and then we moved to Townsend from there. I've been teaching American history in Quincy since 1998. I think that puts me in my 24th school year there. And Robert didn't know this. I had mentioned it to him before the talk, that before, while I was teaching, actually, I was the curator of the Lizzie Borden Museum down in Fall River. And I also later was the curator of Maplecroft, where Lizzie Borden lived after the trial. So Robert, I'll be happy to do a Borden speech for you guys anytime. You just let me know. So the Fleming School, or what is now the Fleming School, actually has had many different names. When you look at the town records, which I was really lucky that I was able to go into the town clerk's office years ago. Elizabeth Carey was the clerk at that time. And when I was using these records, and she was very good about giving me access to everything. And you really see through time how the Fleming School changes just by its name. So the school system in Tewksbury at that time in the 1800s was divided into districts. Or I remember Dave Marcus, who was the former president of the Historical Society, referred to them as squadrons, which I've seen that too. So you would have had different districts around the town of Tewksbury, and the North Tewksbury district, where the Fleming School is located, was district number 3. So sometimes that school was called District School number 3, sometimes just number 3, sometimes school number 3. It was referred to as the North Tewksbury School, the North School, the North Rural School, the North Rural Practice School. Then it was the Ella E Flemings School, which we'll get back to that because that was an issue that they spelled the last name incorrectly. And then finally, the Ella E Flemings School. So the school itself has had many different names. It's not the original school. So what you see now as the Ella Flemings School, there actually was another building that was closer to the intersection of Andover Street and North Street. And that was the original school number 3. And we see in 1858 that the voters in the North District voted that they needed a new schoolhouse. It's not really clear why they needed a new schoolhouse. It's not clear if the school that was there was run down. I know that it was sold for $31.50. So it's possible that it was moved or added onto a building or torn down so that someone could have the land. But the traces of the school pretty much end with that original school. So the new school, what we now call the Ella E Flemings School, was built in 1859, and it actually isn't even in its original location. So the Ella Flemings School, the original one-room building, was about 50 feet further up north, closer to the church across the street. So that would place it like almost in the middle of, I guess it would be the east side lane of Andover Street. So picture the school originally about 50 feet further up. So it has been moved in its time. Now, as a history teacher, knowing that school was built in 1859, I always think it's interesting to think about what the kids in that school heard about in the news. So like, for example, the students that I had last year lived through the election of 2020. They saw the storming of the Capitol on January 6th. So what the kids in the Flemings schools saw, I put on the screen here. And, in 1859, that was the year that John Brown raided Harper's Ferry in the hopes of ending slavery. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. So the kids in the Fleming School, or what was then school number 3, were talking about this. They were talking about Fort Sumter being bombarded. They were talking about the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, the end of the Civil War. They would have been in those classes with their teacher talking about the Titanic sinking, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. They would have been talking about JFK being assassinated. September 11th, there were students in that building. So one of the things I was really fascinated with about this school, as I really started to study it, was how it really served the town of Tewksbury, how it really served the people of North Tewksbury, and how over time, the needs of the community shifted. And as the needs of the community shifted, the school did as well. And I find fascinating. And we're still seeing it today. As a teacher, I can tell you, like, as the needs of society change, the educational needs of the children do as well. And the schools reflect that. So the Fleming School is no different than that. But again, I do think it's fascinating to think about what students who were sitting in those rooms were hearing about from their teachers, and to think that this school goes all the way back to when James Buchanan was president of the United States is amazing. And truthfully, Tewksbury is so lucky to have this building and to still have it standing when so many other historic sites in the area no longer exist. So again, the school, like Robert had mentioned, was originally a one-room school that was built in 1859. I'm going to go to the next slide to show you the picture, because it's easier for me to describe the school using a photograph. So this is what the school originally looked like when it was built. It was white. Most people think that schoolhouses were red. That actually is a bit of a fallacy. I mean, obviously there were some red schoolhouses, but the Fleming School was white. Most schoolhouses were white. Because if you think about it, white paint or whitewash was much easier for people to come by than red. So Winslow Homer painted a painting in the 1800s called Snap the Whip. And it's a painting that shows a little red schoolhouse and children out in front playing. And the popularity of that painting made people think that one-room schoolhouses were red, but typically white buildings, like you would see here. The building had a cupola. I've not seen anything mentioning a bell, like having a large bell in the belfry of the cupola of the school. There were two separate entrances. One was for girls and one was for boys. And if you look on both sides of the building, you see that there's a high board fence on either side. So the high board fence went around the building, and in the back, from the center of the school to the edge of the property, there was a fence. They cut the two sides, which they use as playgrounds, in half. So there was a girls' side for the girls to play in, and there was a boys' side. And you didn't cross the line because there was a fence down the middle. There were also separate outhouses in the back. This may be one of them right here. If you look really carefully, you can see the roof of this. And there also was a woodshed. Now, I have to say that I was really lucky when I was about 11 years old that I met a man named Irving Bailey. He lived at the corner of Andover Street and North Street. And he had a garage over there to fix cars. But when I met him, he was probably in his 80s at least. And Jack Ware actually introduced me to him. And Irving Bailey had gone to school at the Flemings School when it was one room, and he was the custodian for many years. So he literally drew floor plans for me of what the school looked like when it was one room, when it was two rooms, and then now three rooms. And he introduced me to all these people like Ella Flemings, and told me what they were like. And again, I'm 11, I'm writing it down. And so at that time, I was really lucky that I was able to capture his memories. So when you look at this picture, this school is an excellent example of Italianate architecture. You can see that by the arched windows in the front, and also the bracketed cornice is indicative of Italianate style architecture from the middle of the 1800s. So the school was not just a plain building. When this was designed, it was designed with some architectural style to it. And oftentimes, schoolhouses were designed to look like churches. In some communities, the churches doubled as the school, or the school doubled as the church. And you might notice if you go into the Flemings School, for example, if you're standing in the rooms and you look out the window, you're actually a little higher up. So that if you're, for example, standing on the ground, you have to look up to see into the windows. You're lower than the windows. And that was done on purpose, because the idea was you wanted people that were inside the church to feel elevated, to feel like they were in a special place. And if you were down on the ground, you wanted people that were in the church to feel like they were higher up, better than the people who are down on the ground, more special. So there's a reason for the school to be up a little higher. And you see that in churches and in other buildings as well. The pump that you see here was put in 1876. So I know this picture is at least 1876 or after. But I love this photo. This actually, you can see it in Ask Not of the Days That Are Past by Harold J. Patton. But also the Tewksbury Historical Society has this. And just before I go a lot further, I just want to make sure that I mention this. Robert said earlier how I have a book almost finished on the Flemings School. It's a couple hundred pages. It's not a narrative history. It's more like a chronological, like almost like an encyclopedia type of book. It's a resource, really, that I think really shows what this school meant to Tewksbury. But other school systems, other systems around the country could look at that book and see what schools have meant to our communities. But I actually have a lot of other photographs that I want to keep for the book. So I went through and made sure that the pictures that I'm using are good. They're great. But I do have others that will be in the book, some that are originals, some that are more clear that you'll see in the book. And I was lucky enough that a lot of people gave me photographs that I can use for the book. And so, where this is going to be online and on YouTube, I just want those photographs to be seen in the book first. So I have to apologize for that right up front. Let's take a look. Now, this picture is also in Harold Patton's book, but it's not identified. And this is the original Flemings School as well. And you can see in the back here, you can see what probably is the woodshed. But you'll notice that, again, 2 front doors. And then on each side of the building, there would have been a side door so that the kids, could go from here into the playground. And the same would have been this on the other side as well. So if you go into the Flemings School today, the original school building would be, if you're looking at the school, you can clearly see the original building. But if you're inside, it would take up the classroom immediately on your right-hand side and the central hallway. The central hallway was part of the original schoolroom. So the original schoolroom is actually bigger than the classroom that's there now. But again, they would have had, at least all 8 grades sitting in that classroom. And that was one thing that I found really fascinating in studying this, was how did teachers, being a teacher myself, how did teachers teach 8 grades at once? Like, how did they manage to do that? And luckily, I was able to interview some folks in Tewksbury who went to the Flemings School when it was a 2-room schoolhouse, and grades 1 through 4 were in one, or 1 through 3 were in one room, and 4 through 8 in another. And so they were able to really explain to me how teachers were able to teach such a wide variety of students, a wide variety of grades, a wide variety of subjects for each grade. And man, do I give those teachers credit. I really do. I love this photo as well, because again, in Patton's book, it's not identified, but I can tell you it is absolutely schoolhouse number 3. And one thing that's really interesting is if you look right here, there's a light. So that would help knowing when lights were put on Andover Street, that there is an outdoor light here at this school. I know that this is before 1912 because that's when the school was enlarged. So this is probably between 1876, 1912. So it's somewhere, probably in the late 1800s. I also think, as an educator, that it's interesting to look at what kids studied at different times. And in 1880, this is a list of the textbooks that were used in Tewksbury Public Schools. So maybe not every single book was used in the Flemings School. They may not have been using algebra in the Flemings School. That might have been, reserved for the high school. But it does give you an idea that they were, spelling, reading, mathematics, geography, English, not English the language, but like ELA, English Language Arts. Grammar was huge. U.S. history, of course. Teachers in one-room schools also taught art. So they would be teaching drawing. They were the teachers who taught all of the specialists. So they'd be doing specialties. So they would be doing art. They would be taking the kids outside to exercise. They would be giving them fresh air. They would be walking them on field trips, perhaps taking them on nature walks to identify trees and plants and animals. So these one-room school teachers were not just the teachers, but they were the guidance counselors. They were the principals. They were the nurses. In some instances, they were the parents for some of these students. So they had a much larger role than we see today. I mean, the teachers were the custodians. They were responsible to get to school earlier than the students and light the fire in the potbelly stove. They were responsible to clean the school. Now, could students help them? Absolutely. But these were listed for teachers as part of their jobs. So, as an educator now, I definitely, tip my hat 100% to these early educators. So let's talk a little bit about Ella Flemings. I was very, very fortunate to meet Ella Fleming's great niece and great nephew. And later in life, Ella lived with them. So they opened up all their stories for me. They let me use some of their family photos of her. They let me use some of her writings. So, I'm going to be including that in the book that's coming. But Ella Flemings actually went to the Flemings School, so school number 3. And her house it's still standing. If you go up North Street from the center of Tewksbury, so you drive up North Street towards Andover Street, when you get to the bridge that goes over 495, on the left-hand side, there's a white house that sits back a little bit. That's the James Flemings house, and that is her dad. So that was her home. So she only really, as a student, just walked up North Street and she would have been at school. So she was a student there and later became a teacher as well. At one point when she was teaching, she lived across the street. So if you stand in front of the Flemings School with the school to your back, on the left-hand side is the church, then there's Fisk Street, and to the right of Fisk Street, there's a big house. That is where Ella lived for a period of time. And a later teacher, Eva Hersey, that most of the people that I knew had her. Most of the people when I was growing up had Eva Hersey as a teacher. She was an institution in this school. But she actually lived across the street, renting a room in that house. So, Ella also taught at school number 2 in the center of school, and then later was at school number 3, or the North School, which we now call the Flemings School. She was there for a while, about 22 years, and left to teach at the Foster School. And I was lucky enough to meet and get to know Mary Garland, who herself was a Tewksbury institution. And she went to the Foster School, but she also, if I'm not mistaken, did her student teaching there. And she was telling me that when you walk into the Foster School, the first classroom on the left-hand side was Miss Fleming's classroom. And she told me that she remembered that Ella Flemings used to walk around the playground outside with the students, like walking them around, and that she had a clapper as she walked, and that she walked with a limp. And so I said that to Ella Fleming's niece, and she went, "Oh my God, Bill, I forgot that." She goes, "She absolutely did walk with a limp." She said, I would never have remembered that if you hadn't said it. So these little stories bring people to life. And, just even in my own classroom, and you'll see it in the book as well. In my own classroom, I always want to bring historic characters to life. I want people to see them as real human beings, as, flesh and bone people. And I really did see that with the Flemings School. Of course, Ella Fleming's family and friends called her Nellie. So even her nephew and niece, they all called her Aunt Nellie. So she was the principal of the Foster School. And in 1919, she resigned so she could go live with her nephew and help him raise his children. And his niece was telling me that in 1938, in September, when they had the Great Hurricane, that Ella Flemings was terrified of this. There was a tree out in front of their house, and they were living in Worcester at the time, and she was really afraid that tree was going to get blown down on the house. And her niece told me, she said, my aunt ended up dying. We always felt like she just worried herself to death. But she died during the hurricane, and she was petrified at the time that the tree in front of the house was going to be blown over and collapse into the house. So I learned a lot about Ella Flemings, and, I really am, proud that the town named the building after her, because she sounded like quite the educator and quite the human being. So if you go up to the Flemings School in 1997, the building was rededicated in memory of Ella Flemings. So on the front of the school, there is this plaque that the Historical Society placed on the building that says that it is dedicated in memory of Ella E. Flemings. So one of the things about the Fleming School that older students remembered, and when I say older, I mean people that went to school there like before 1920. So, you know, I was lucky enough to, you know, when I was much younger, to meet some of these folks. And they really remember a lot of student teachers in the school. And the reason for that is in June 1907, there was an arrangement made between the State Normal School in Lowell and the North School, or School Number 3, or what will become the Ella Fleming School. And a normal school is a school for training teachers. So today, the State Normal School in Lowell is UMass Lowell. But the arrangement was that the normal school would send teachers over to the North School in Tewksbury, and they would get credit for practicing teaching. So, you know, as a teacher, I had to do my student teaching as well, and that's basically what they were doing. So what a great opportunity to have the North School available for that. And as a result, the Massachusetts state fund contributed money to the school and to salaries for teachers in Tewksbury to make up for this. So it was a win-win situation for both sides. So the Fleming School became known as a rural practice school or a model school. And I do have an article from 1913. I don't know where it's from. It has a date on it, but it's unclear where that article actually came from. I've looked. But it talks about the school being a rural practice school. And one of the things that's really cool about this article is it describes the school inside. So I could tell you at this point in time what paintings were hanging in the school. And I know that at some point coming up, the school is going to be painted gray. So some older people in Tewksbury, and I don't mean that facetiously by any means, so people that would have attended the Fleming School probably before 1970 would remember the school as being gray. If you go in the building, so when you walk in the front door, on the right-hand side, as you walk in there's a set of front doors, and you walk into a little vestibule, go further past 2 more doors, another set of double doors into the actual hallway. And on the right-hand side is this plaque that says, in 1907, the State Board of Education authorized the normal school at Lowell to use this rural mixed school as an observation or training school for its students, the first of its kind in the Commonwealth. So that actually comes from the article that I found from 1913 that says that this was the first school like this in Massachusetts. Now, I've heard since then that another school somewhere in Massachusetts claims to be the first school that had student teachers. I just have this particular article, so I would say that it may have been the first school that allowed student teachers. I will say that it's at least very early that it did. So the Fleming School was getting to be too small as a one-room school, because again, this is the one room right here. It's just this. So the town voted to enlarge the school by placing this addition onto the side of the building. So this would have been on the west side of the building. Today, that's 1 classroom, but in 1912, when that was added on, it would have been 2 small rooms, and they were used as recitation rooms. So that meant that the student teachers could pull smaller groups of students or a specific grade of students in one of those rooms and work just with that grade, while the lead teacher could teach the whole population in the main classroom. So the smaller rooms were really recitation rooms. They were just like extra space, mostly used by the student teachers. They also added a restroom. So now the school had an indoor restroom, and a supply closet as well. And this is also at the time when the school is going to be moved back 50 feet. So the school was rolled back 50 feet from where it was and then added on to. So if you're looking at the school, this is the addition, this side right here. So the school was still described as a one-room school with 2 recitation rooms. It basically stayed in that condition, which actually, now I'm thinking about it, if you go into the school today and you walk into that central hallway, this addition that I'm talking about is on the left. So if you go in that classroom, if you look up at the ceiling, you can see the scar in the ceiling where there had been a wall at one time. And I know the door between the 2 rooms was closer to the window. So those were just 2 small rooms, which later they're going to knock down that middle wall and make it one big classroom as the needs of the community necessitated more space for more students. So in 1928, the school was enlarged, and it was enlarged by placing a classroom in the back of the school. So when they enlarged the school and placed that addition in the back, that was considered a very modern addition. And if you go back into that room, you'll see that all of the tin on the walls, you see that the tin, same pattern is used in the original schoolroom. So I would say that the tin in the original schoolroom was probably dated from that time period when they put the tin in the back room in 1928, when that addition happened. Because in 1928, when they enlarged the school, that's when they took space from the original classroom and made the central hallway going down the center of the school. So they would have put the tin on the walls in the 2 classrooms, because again, the small rooms were used as recitation rooms. And the recitation rooms, in all truthfulness, if you look at the history of the school, they put the wall up between the 2 rooms, then they tore it down. They put it up, tore it down, whenever they needed more space. And I know when those first 2 rooms were put into the school, that it wasn't a solid wall between the recitation rooms and the main classroom. It was a folding wall, so that like Eva Hersey, when she was the lead teacher, she could open up the main classroom and the recitation rooms so she could address the whole school population at one time. And for 1912, I find that fascinating that they actually had sliding doors between classrooms like that so that the teacher could open up the whole space. The Ella Flemings School, if I want to just talk about where it got its name, I mean, we know it's after Ella Flemings, but in 1920, there was a school in the center of town that they actually called the Library School, and later it became the Spalding School. In 1920, they wanted to name that the Ella E Flemings School, and Miss Flemings refused. She, turned that down. And then in 1935, the town of Tewksbury voted to rename the North School the Ella E Flemings School. And if you look at photos of the school at that time, you'll notice that the sign in front of the school said Ella E Fleming School, no S. And one of her relatives went through Tewksbury and saw that. And he wrote into the town that he wanted that changed because he thought that that was just a mistake, and that his aunt's last name and his last name ended in S. So you can kind of date pictures of the school from when they changed the sign and added the S in Flemings. So her last name really is Flemings. So what is on the school right now is accurate. So in 1949, the school enrollment decreased, and so the Ella Fleming School was closed for a period of time. And that's when Eva Hersey retired. She actually was from Maine, and she moved back up to Maine, where she will eventually pass away in Maine. So from 1952 to 1955, when you look at the town records, the school population in Tewksbury exploded. And as you're reading the records, you see that some of the schools were on double time. They were using every available inch for classroom space that they could. So the Ella Fleming School had to be reopened. And again, they saw it as a two-room school. Those little recitation rooms were still divided, and they weren't seen as classroom space. So you had two classrooms there, and they were basically for what they called ungraded classes, which is basically special needs. And by 1966, you see that the Ella Fleming School is housing sixth grade classes. So it had 3 sixth grade classes. And for a period of time, before the Doing School was built, the town of Tewksbury was using the wing building that's behind the church, the Baptist church across the street. And so they were connected. The Andover Street, I think they call it the Andover Street wing, and the Fleming School, because Jack Ware was the principal of both. And when he was at the Fleming School, he was a teaching principal. He taught grade 6. He taught in the original 1859 schoolroom. And I actually talked to him one day about the ghosts in the school, because somebody told me the school was haunted. And so I asked him, and he told me that one day he was alone in the school. And if you go down in the basement, the school actually has a great basement. But it used to be, even when I was a kid and I went in there the first time, there were offices down in the basement. And he said that he was sitting down there in the office and he was working, and he heard someone walk down the hallway of the center hallway of the school upstairs. So he went upstairs looking to see who was up there, and there was nobody there. There was a legend about a kid being killed in a wagon or accident outside the school. I've never found any documentation to prove that. So until 1981, the school operated in conjunction with the Doing School, and there were 6th grade classes in that building. And then due to Prop 2.5, the school closed. So the town then rented the school building out to the Little Red Schoolhouse, which was basically a nursery school and daycare. And it stayed that way until 1996. And Tewksbury needed the space again. And whenever Tewksbury needed classroom space, the Fleming School was there to serve. And so from 1997 to 2004, there were special needs classes in the Fleming School. So that means that the Fleming School has served the people of Tewksbury, especially the students, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, and in the 21st century. So since 2004, the school has remained vacant. Back in 1996, I just thought I'd mention this, there was a physical change to the building in that because it was going to be used for special needs classes, they wanted to have handicapped accessibility. So they removed a window from the side of the school and added a handicap entrance here. And then the ramp went down the side of the school and across the front. So that has been changed back over the last several years. So if we were to take a look at the school today, so again, today the school is basically used for storage. So again, I'm biased, I know it. You know, my hope is to see the school, you know, cleaned out at some point and used again by Tewksbury, because it's an amazing space. It's amazing history in this building. But this is the center hallway, and this is the original schoolroom. But again, in 1859, this was part of the original school. And these are the 2 recitation rooms on this side, and this would have been a folding wall. This is the original schoolroom. Again, you're looking at the pressed tin walls, which I think are beautiful. When I was a kid, there was a door on this closet and there were drawers under here. to give teachers storage space. Again, this is the original schoolroom. This would have been used for the primary grades because this chalkboard right here, and these are the original ledges. Again, the chalk tray, excuse me, would have gone all the way across. It's low to the ground so that little elementary school kids could reach the chalkboard. So again, this is the original schoolroom. Again, it's used for storage. So I apologize, you know, that you're seeing it like this, but that way you're at least seeing that the school's still being used by the town. It's being used for storage, so it's serving a function. This is the 1928 addition to the school, again, with the pressed tin walls. Lots of storage space. My sixth grade teacher, Monica Ware, this was her classroom, and she loved this room. She loved the fact that this room had closets, and she had this cloak room right in her classroom, and there was a closet here. There was a closet at this end of her room. There was cabinet space and drawers and another closet. So she loved all the storage space. And when she went down to the doing school being built, I think in 1970, was modern, and there really wasn't a lot of storage space. There were no, you know, closets in those rooms. So I remember saying, you know, I miss all that. And these are the recitation rooms that have been made into one classroom. At one time, when this school was kind of on its own, before the doing school was built, hot lunches would be sent over. And there was an oven in this side of the classroom where, you know, the teachers could heat pizza. I remember talking to one of the teachers. He said that was in his classroom. He had to heat pizza for the kids. The 1911 edition, I think I said 1912. I apologize for that. It is 1911. But the second I said 1912, I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And so if you look up in the ceiling, you'll be able to see where the dividing wall was. There's a scar there. So this would have just been two small rooms. Some more recent changes. So when I was a kid, the Flemings School had two basement entrances. Those basement entrances were deemed not in good shape. So they have since been removed. So the school has had work done on it. The paint job on the school looks amazing. It looks really cared for now. Beverly Bennett was telling me that when she was a kid and they had outdoor recess back here, that there was that invisible line down the center of the parking lot in the back. This was their playground. There was an invisible line, and the boys and the girls could not mix. And she said if it was raining or snowing and they had recess in the basement, there was an invisible line down the middle and you could not cross. And to me, that goes back to when the school was a one-room school. Boys entered on one side, girls on the left, one side. So the playgrounds in the back, there was a fence in between them. So separate. And so when I heard that there was an invisible line, it reminded me of that's how the school has always been. So also, the handicap ramp has been removed from the side of the building, as you can see, and the window has been put back. So the school really looks good right now. It really does. It looks like it's in good shape. It looks like the roof's new. So I'm thrilled as a historian. I really want to see Tewksbury support this building and use it for something in the future. And I know it would take a lot to renovate it. Obviously, finances are always an issue in any community, but whatever the school needs, if the town could, see it in its heart to give the school what it needs, it deserves it. It really has served this town. Now it's in its third century, again, served in the 1800s, the 1900s, and in the 2000s. So I really hope that the school is someday renovated, that it's put to some good use, and that it is maintained for future generations to be able to go back into this building and see what education through history was like for kids in Tewksbury. And that's it. That's what I have. That's what I have. So I'm, happy to take any questions, Robert, if you saw that there were any.
Sure. So folks, if you have any questions for Bill, please type them into the Q&A box or the chat box. If you're listening on Facebook, I think we have about 10 live viewers on Facebook. Feel free to type a question into the comment box and I'll try to capture those as well. So let's see here. Deja says, great presentation. Well, thank you, Deja. I agree. Bill did a great job.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
So let's
Means a
see.
lot to me.
Deja
Thank you.
asks, was the school ever integrated? I assume so. And if so, what year?
When she says integrated, I'm assuming that she's talking about racially integrated. That I don't know. I've never seen that. That's a really interesting question. I've never seen that listed anywhere about that. I've never even seen it mentioned in any of the annual reports for Tewksbury being talked about at all. So that I have absolutely no idea about. That's interesting. I've never seen that anywhere. Not even hinted at.
Chris says, thank you. Thank you. A hand clapping emoji. Beth says, thank you for the interesting talk. Frank asks, where is the normal school building at UMass Lowell today?
Oh, you know what? That I would have to go down there and look. I'm not sure which building it is. Or if that original building is even still standing. That I do not know. Which one it was the original normal school. What's interesting is most of the schools, like I went to Fitchburg State, that was originally Fitchburg Normal. Bridgewater State was Bridgewater Normal. So that originally was Lowell Normal School. But I believe that, so my sixth grade teacher, Monica Ware, went to school there in the 1950s, and it was Lowell Teachers College. So it's had a bunch of different names. I think it was, now it's UMass Lowell, but it had a name before that too. It was Lowell, University of Lowell.
So Bill, one of our viewers on Facebook, Stephanie, thinks it may now be called Coburn Hall, Coburn Hall, Coburn Hall at UMass Lowell.
Thank you, Stephanie. I actually appreciate that a ton. I'm going to write that down and I'm going to check that because that is something that I did not know. And I'm glad somebody asked that because that's important.
Great. And there may be a delay on Facebook, so I apologize for folks watching on Facebook. Bonnie says that she loves the background stories and she thought it was a very interesting talk. Mary says, so very interesting, thank you. Denise says she loves this building's history. She says that she believes her son was in preschool there, if she remembers correctly, back in 99 to 2000.
Yep.
Joseph asks, was there an age limit for students when it was a one-room school? So what was the age limit for students when it was a one-room school?
You know what, most one-room schools wouldn't have had an age limit because you would have had the different grades, but a lot of times, especially when there were no hard, fast laws that you had to be in school. Like right now, you have to stay in school in Massachusetts until you're 16. That didn't exist when we were more of a rural community in Tewksbury. So what would have happened is some kids would get yanked out of school for a term because the parents needed them on the farm. So they would be home either planting or harvesting, working on the farm, and then they might come back for a term. So they may be in school longer than other students because they were pulled out so many times. So I've never seen that there was an age limit in the schools at all. No, I think it was pretty fluid. And I think it was a case by case basis. In fact, I'm sure most people know that our school schedule now is because of being a rural economy at one point, where we wanted the summers off so kids could work on the farms, they could be ready to harvest. And so that's why we still have the schedule that we do now.
Sure.
That's a great question.
So 8 o'clock. So let's say a last call for questions. I have 3 more at least for you, Bill.
Okay.
So on Facebook, Bonnie asks, did any of the students there also reside at the Tewksbury Holmes house? Did the school support education for those children?
I've never ever seen mention of that ever. And that is an amazing point. I've never thought about that either, like about students coming from the alms house there. I tend to not think so. And again, I might be wrong. I'm not an expert on the alms house, but I seem to believe that they were separate, that the alms house was something that was separate. It was state funded, not so much local Tewksbury funded.
I'm going to save Bonnie's second question for the end.
Okay.
Rose says she loved your presentation. I am sure I missed some stuff. Why have I seen vehicles in front of the building recently? It made me ask friends who lived in Tewksbury longer than I have, who had children, about this school. So why has she been seeing vehicles in front of the building recently?
That I have no idea. I live in Stoughton, so I don't know. But I was there, I want to say during I stopped by there in the summertime, because if I'm doing research in the Tewksbury room, in the the local history room at the library, I'll drive by the school just to see what the school looks like. And there was a lot going on over at the Doing School. So I'm wondering if faculty from the Doing School don't just park over at the Flemings School as well. They might. I don't know.
Interesting comment from Pat. Pat's one of the directors on the Tewksbury Historical Society. She says, nice presentation. Before COVID, I had been working on restoring the original classroom into an actual historical experience where students could experience a day in an 1858 classroom along with a museum. Nancy Reed had been working with me on this. We hope to continue this in the near future. She also notes that the custodians say that the building is still haunted.
That's awesome. And Pat, Nancy, I'm here. I will help you do anything that you need. Anything that I have, the book's going to be done by then. It's got to be. I've got to do this. I'm happy to help. I want to help, actually. It would mean a lot to me personally to be able to give back to the community like this. And, I decided too, that I know that this book's never going to be a bestseller or anything like that, but I do want to make sure that I donate any proceeds to the Historical Society, especially if the money's going to go to the school. And the book is dedicated. Oh no, that's my pleasure. The book is actually dedicated to two people. It's dedicated to my 6th grade teacher who taught there, who again was so good to me during what was in my home life, a very difficult year. And also to Beverly Bennett. I mean, she lived in this house, the brown house next to the school. And my love for the school would not have been the same without the two of them, for sure.
And final question from Bonnie. You've alluded to it several times. We're going to hold you to it. She wants to know, when is your book coming out?
Oh my God. So I started writing this book, honestly, in the 90s. But, I was still in college, and then I started my career. And so I just kind of always put it off a little bit at a time. And this summer, I really was at the Tewksbury Public Library a lot because I had a list of things I needed to finish. And during COVID, I couldn't get into the library. So COVID put the project off a good year. So at this point, I just have to do some final touches. I'm going to give the printed volume, what I have now, to an editor, and she's going to, it goes by her schedule too. And while she's editing it, I'm going to work on the index. So I'm hoping it's got to be 2022. Like I'm hoping, because I have some other projects I need to work on as well. So I have another book in the works that I want to get going as well.
Is it Tewksbury based or Quincy based or Stoughton based, or is it Lizzie Borden? What's your second book? It's
not. It's actually Townsend based. So when my dad passed away when I was 14 years old, 13 actually, I was almost 14. We moved from Tewksbury to Townsend, and that's where I went to high school and lived through college. And so I want to do something for their historical society as well. It's just me being a history person and really wanting to give back. and leave something. Like, the school means a lot to me. So it means a lot for me to write this. Not everybody sees what I see when I look at the school. I remember saying to my mother that I had written this book, it's almost done. And she looked at me and she said, why would you want to write a book about that? And I'm like, you were the one who used to bring me down there and lift me up to look in the windows. Like, the school means something. I want the town to preserve it and to see that it's special. Because once this is gone, if it ever goes, if this became a restaurant or condos, it's not going to be the same. We have a chance, and I know it's going to cost a lot of money. There's got to be a way to make this work for the town, so the town has something that's historic to be proud of in North Tewksbury. There's got to be a way.
Well, I'll make an editorial comment. I think we have enough trouble filling the current empty, vacant commercial buildings in town. I don't think we should knock down another school to build a business. We have plenty of storefronts that need to be filled as is. Last comment goes to Nancy, who says, Nancy Reed, the vice chair of the Historical Society. She says, "Thank you, Bill. You are an inspiration." Oh,
she's an absolutely amazing human being, and it's my honor to know her. Honestly, she's been very good to me.
So, Bill, any last words before we wrap up for the evening?
At first, again, thank you. And this meant a lot to me to present the history of the school. It means a lot to me to be connected to the school. This building meant a lot, again, to my 6th grade teacher, Monica Ware, meant a lot to Beverly Bennett. And I really want to be part of whatever is going to be happening going forward, because I really want to see it saved. I want to see it as something that the town can be proud of. And if I have a little piece of that, what a legacy that is. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Thank you to Doug and Nancy and the Tewksbury Historical Society for co-sponsoring tonight's event. Thank you to the Friends of the Library as well. For those watching live, look for an email from me tomorrow with a link to a feedback survey. Please let us know what you thought of tonight's event. Also in that email will be a link to tonight's recording. And then as a reminder, this Sunday, 2 o'clock, John Dixon, the president of the Tewksbury England Historical Society, will be giving a lecture on the history of their Tewksbury. And then at 3:30, Doug Sears, the president of our Tewksbury Historical Society, will be giving a virtual talk on the history of our Tewksbury. And I've seen a sneak peek of Doug's presentation, and he's going to do a great job. So I hope if you're free this Sunday, if you're not Patriots fans, join us for those 2 programs. Information was provided in the chat, and it will be included in the email tomorrow. So again, thank you so much, Bill. Good luck with the rest of your school year, and best of luck in finally finishing this book. And hope you have a great night. Hope everyone has a great night. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Bye, Bill.
Thank you.